All right, before the race recap, real quick, just talk about my setup. I was racing a Canyon in-flight, which is a cyclocross bike. I had Gravel King SKs set up tubeless. I had a 38C on the front and a 35C on the back. And I was running approximately 35 PSI in both tires. And a note on bottle cages, Barry-Roubaix is very bouncy, like probably most gravel races, so I did put some extra friction in my bottle cage. I put some old bar tape and duct tape in here to keep the bottle in, and it worked like a charm. I ended up eating 5 Cis Energy gels, and I did that pretty early on in the race. And then one thing I didn't mention in the race recap is that you should be drinking and eating during the paved sections. There are a few paved sections, but use those to drink and eat. All right, here's the race recap. This is a recap of the 2021 Barry-Roubaix gravel race, 36-mile men's open. If you're not familiar with Barry-Roubaix, it's often cited as the world's largest gravel road race, and it takes place in Barry County, Michigan, in the city of Hastings. There are 4 different races you can enter. There's a 100-mile endurance ride. There's a 62-mile race. This year it attracted several pros from across the country. There's a 36-mile race, which is the one I did, and I'll be doing a recap on. And then there's some smaller races for beginner racers. And as I said, this takes place in Michigan. Here's the website if you're interested. It's on rolling hills. Oftentimes it's in the spring. This year it was in the fall due to COVID. Next year it will be in March, so it'll be a little bit colder. The conditions this year, it was around 70 degrees, cloudy, really dry, sandy, and not too much loose gravel, a little bit here and there. And let's see, the 62-mile race, this is who won. Hugo Scala. Alexi is a local pro. He won Iceman before. But you can see some bigger names here from some bigger teams. And then going on to the 36-mile race, this is who won here. This is the group that I was in the lead group. And I just want to talk a little bit about how it all went down and some strategies and perhaps where I made some mistakes. I came in 12th overall, about I think it was 6 seconds off of the lead in a mass sprint. So this year, per Strava, it looks like the elevation was around 2,500 feet. We completed the race in approximately an hour and 38 minutes, and it was 36 miles. We averaged around 22 miles per hour. And I want to walk us through the Strava flyby and point out some things if you're going to be racing this event that might help you in the future. So I don't have the entire group on the Strava flyby. I do have a pretty good representation though here of individuals that were in the men's open, and we can do a little walkthrough of how the race went down and where it broke up and where it came back together. So as you can see, we started in Hastings here, and I believe this is all pavement, and it was a slow start. I felt like similar to years before, it isn't a very speedy start. You can sort of keep up with the mass, the lead group, until some of the first gravel roads and climbing, and it starts to pick up. So here you can see we're starting to hit our first climb of the day, and the group's still pretty well together. There was very little action for about the first, I would say, 10 miles. It was pretty standard, and as you can see on the course, you hit one big climb and then it's pretty flat for quite a while. And this is going to be an exciting area to talk about, which is Sager Road. You can see how it imploded here, and all of the lead group sort of broke up into various sections. So as you start hitting these hills, a lot of the people will really hammer these hills, and depending on if you're a strong climber, if you've got the energy and the fitness to hammer the hills, that you might consider practicing sag racing, where you try to get to the front and drift back up these hills and let everybody really hammer it and burn their energy. You'll find that many people are eager to get up and over the hill and then need a rest on the other side. And when they rest, you can, if you sagged the hill, you can easily catch up and recuperate while they're doing the same. So don't feel the urge to hammer those hills if you know you're capable of staying with the lead group. Try to conserve some energy. Didn't see too many crashes. There was one big crash, which I'll reference in a moment, but along some of these speedy sections, there were patches of sand, which in previous years, it didn't seem as sandy, I think because of the freeze-thaw from spring, and the roads were a little bit more frozen. But this year, even on the speedy sections, there were patches of sand in the middle of the road, and it was normal to be seeing people within the group fishtailing and swerving at speed when we were going 30, 35 miles down a hill. It was happening. There was also big chunks of gravel shooting up through the air and hitting bikes and helmets and stuff like that, but nothing dangerous. So really pretty scenery. I guess you don't really get to enjoy it much, but you're coming here upon Yankee Springs recreational area, which is a state park, and there's actually races here occasionally, which is a great area to ride. And by the way, this course is permanently marked, so you can come out here and ride these courses anytime. People often pre-ride them and get a feel for the course before the race. So you can see the group is still sticking together pretty well, and I think at this point we're all working together, I would say, to more or less of an extent, though it was kind of messy. I think people were all over the place. You're passing a lot of slower people because the 62-mile wave went on ahead of you. So you're doing a lot of passing. There's a lot of loose stuff you're keeping an eye out for, but still pretty moderate pace. And I think it didn't pick up until after Sager Road, which we're about to hit here. So you can see from this low point, when you complete Sager Road, you've really finished the two biggest climbs and the biggest climbing for the day. So I'm going to pause it here for a moment and talk about Sager Road. But before I do, I believe it was Hastings Road. I think this is Hastings here. There was a crash on Hastings. It was before Sager Road, and it was a sharp left turn into some gravel, and I happened to be alongside the three individuals that fell, and one of the guy's bike tires, so three people fell, and the guy next to me bunny hopped over the guy that fell and sort of landed on the guy that fell's wheel, and then just rode it off and saved himself. But when he did his bunny hop and bounced off the guy, his tire bounced up and hit my elbow and hip. So almost went down here. It was pretty chaotic. And later I heard a report that a big group of people also went down around this turn when they encountered the individuals that fell. So this is the kind of stuff you have to be concerned about. And there are a few tight turns at Barry that go into gravel where if somebody's cooking it, you could easily fall there. And if you hit a pile of sand, you might fishtail and sort of cause a scene. Okay, so that was the only crash per se that I saw, except for on Sager. Sager is a total mess, which we'll talk about in a second. But here we're coming up on Sager. And if you're in a big group, you want to be aware of these roads and the course. You might even put a marker on your frame of these roads before you get to Sager, because what you want to do before you get to Sager is try to get to the front of the big group you're in. Unless you are in the very front of wave 62 where the pros ride, this is going to be chaos. Sager Road will be utter chaos with people everywhere, bikes everywhere. There's people that are riding fat bikes, tandems, and all sorts of things on Sager Road, and they're all over the place. So you're going to have to be swerving in and out of people and even the people you're with are going to be falling into you, and you just have to be on red alert. So as we go into Sager here, I don't know if you'll see it on the flyby, but there are around right now, there's people trying to sprint to the front of this group to get into Sager. So I'm going to slow it down a little. And here we turn into Sager, and immediately it is a sand fest. This was the worst year for Sager. Other years, Sager is a little bit more firm and short up, and you can ride along the sides. Usually you're taking the high line along the sides, trying to avoid all the sand traps. But this year, everything was sandy, and the sand was extra deep. So even if you wanted to ride through the sand, there were people littering the course. You couldn't ride through often because you'd have people laying in the sand, and then the person next to you might fishtail into you and knock you over. My suggestion here is to keep moving however you can, whether it's on your bike or you're running. Just keep moving and try the best you can, because Sager Road will split every single group up, and this is where people win or lose the race. So do whatever you can to speed through here. Don't be apologetic about flying past people that are laying on the ground. Just keep moving. Like I said, the high side's usually where the leaves break in. By the way, on this circle here, this black circle, you can see our group imploded here. Really, this is where we broke into, I would say, 3 groups. There was a lead group, a chase group, and then everybody else sort of just fell off the back. And you'll see how that sort of manifests at the end here. But this is all uphill too. It's 150 feet of climbing in sand. And then I will say that if there is a clear route through the sand, you can power through it. Keep a loose grip and just power through. It's you need some practice in sand, but you can do it here. There's areas of sand that are deeper than others, but it's possible. And then somewhere around here too, I think at this road there were people passing out fireball shots, so that you get that kind of environment at Barry. You have people all along the sides cheering you on and doing silly things like passing out shots. So that's Sager, and you can see how the group broke up, and you can see some folks that are doing better than others. At this point, I was picking my bike up and sprinting. So if you haven't ran all year, try running a few weeks before Barry to up your running endurance. Really, this makes or breaks the race. If you can make it through Sager quickly, you'll do well, and if you can keep with the lead group, even better. All right, so then Sager, at the top of the climb, you come out and you make this right-hand turn, and this is kind of more of an extension of that Sager effect. So you can see the group has broken up, and this is where the lead group and the chase group eventually forms. So if you're on the tail end of this, you're probably going to miss out on the rest of the race. So by whatever means necessary, you need to try to group with individuals. So if you see people in front of you, work to get on their wheel. If you see people behind you, you might want to slow down and encourage them to get with you. Just because they're behind you doesn't mean they're slower than you if they didn't make it through Sager. Okay, so here I did have to do quite the effort to catch up with these individuals. Eventually we formed a group of about 5, I think it was. And it's hard to tell in here, but there is a lead group and there's a chase group. Let me see. Remember, this isn't everybody that was in the lead and chase group, so it's kind of a mix. But I had to work for about 2 to 3 miles, probably a mile to catch up with the chase group. And then once we formed this little group of about 5 individuals for the chase group, we worked together really well, and we worked for really the remainder of the race, where eventually, you'll see it in a moment, we caught up with the lead group with 5 miles to go. So I'll speed it up a little. And now you can see the groups that formed from Sager. There was a lead group and the chase group, and we picked a few individuals up along the way, people that were probably falling off of this group. And eventually our chase group probably shaped up to be about 20 people, I would say, with 4 or 5 of us doing all the work in the front, with the rest of the individuals sort of just clinging on the back. And it's interesting, you can see where some of these hills are, and you can see how close we got to catching the lead group. But of course the hills equalized the pace, and it took quite the effort to eventually get back. So at times we were just seconds away from them. And you can see these individuals grouped and worked together. So there were a couple chase groups. And it really behooves you to put in some work in these chase groups and work together. One of the riders in front of me must have had his friends in the lead group, because he was giving us updates on how far ahead they were. So that was kind of an unfair advantage, I think, for us. We knew how much we had to work to get to them, and he was giving us updates. And at one point he said, all right, they're just 5 seconds up the road. And at that point, we all just clamored, and we got to them and caught up with them. And I think it's this swervy part right here. So this swervy part is where we catch them, which is with 5 miles to go. And you'll notice that for that segment, it's Tanner to Cook. Yeah, so we hauled ass here. We got the KOM for this section, and that's because here we can see them in our sights, and right when we get around this turn, this is when we got excited, and I think we upped the pace and eventually caught them here and hauled ass through this section. And then an individual in our group counterattacked, so then we took the lead, and from that point on, this was a group of probably 20 or so. Some people fell off. Most of the group stuck together, but it was about 20. And you can see this is where I started to make mistakes. I think I'm a less seasoned rider than most of these individuals, and I could tell, I'm going to pause it, I was looking back at everybody because I was at the front of the group, and I could tell that they were being strategic. They were spread out. They were they weren't taking pulls anymore, and I knew in my mind that I needed to get back into the group, but for whatever reason I just couldn't will myself to slow down and get into the group, or I simply, the logistics of doing it were quite difficult. At this point there's a group of some 20 riders behind me, and trying to figure out how to slow down and get back into the mix in such a way that it would set me up for success for the finish was difficult, or at least in my oxygen depleted mind, I couldn't will myself to do it. But at this point, I should have slowed down and gotten into the mix and have been 10th wheel or somewhere in the middle of the pack. So at 1 mile to go, I strung the group out and tried my best to get back into the group. And at one point I was around 4th or 5th wheel, but again, those individuals slowed down and probably a little bit smarter than me with race tactics. And eventually I then got back to the front of the group, and unfortunately was the lead out for the whole group into the finish chute. So next year, if I'm as fit as I am, I think I'm going to be a little bit smarter here. You can see that I basically let everybody out until the final finish, and then the vast majority of the group passed me, and at that point I came in 12th. So I could smell the podium, and I am kicking myself this morning just thinking about how I should have raced smarter at the end. I raced smart throughout the whole race, conserving energy when I could, working when I needed to catch the lead pack, and then blew it with just seconds to go. So that's Barry-Roubaix 2021 men's open 36-mile race. And it was a blast. It was a ton of fun. We'll be back next year. And that's it. Thanks.